So grateful to be here and very happy to discuss these incredibly important and hard to talk about topics. He has an incredible backbone and staggering moral fiber. Howie is totally committed, completely ethical, totally admirable. No pressure if you can hear this, but honestly, Howie's a hero to me.
John, you joined us before, and it was a pretty incredible kind of testimony you gave, and you just devoted your life to advocacy for child trafficking, and even 9/11 truth. Maybe you could explain to us, in the last decade, what do you think the most challenging parts of coming alive on some of these issues have been?
Probably the hardest thing, and it continues, is just realizing that pretty much everything that I was told and taught since I was in grade school is probably not true. Good evening, Howie, Tim, and Barking Dogs, and they're not mine tonight. Thank goodness. Welcome to the Traffic Report.
I'm sorry about that. I got a little special needs girl here.
That's all right. You are forgiven.
Yeah. I'm
we
very
with technical difficulties before.
Yeah, many of them. And at least they caught me swearing at my dogs live. So I don't think you're going to go there, Tim. So that's a great thing. But before I digress too much, I'm very honored and excited to have Tim Hotham on the show tonight, the brother of Rod Hotham, a murder victim who was murdered because of evidence of child trafficking and child sex trafficking that he had on Senator Cohen from Maine. And it's a very involved, multi-layered story, but the pedophilia is woven throughout. And with that, welcome, Tim.
Thank you.
Welcome, Howie.
Well, I'm always here, but yeah, I've actually followed Tim. I didn't even know his name was Tim for the longest time, but I came across him on Twitter. I mean, months ago, and it took me a little while because his account is Justice for Rod Hotham, or Justice for Rod? What is your Twitter handle?
Justice for Rod. Yeah,
Justice for Rod. And I didn't fully pay attention to it for the longest time, but as it went along, I was like, wow, this is a really crazy story. And if I ever have a podcast, man, I would really love to have you on. And here you are. So,
well, thank you for having me. I'm humbled, and I respect what you guys are doing, and you've been called, I think, to the work. So. Thank you for having me, and I appreciate this opportunity.
And we were talking before, and you said you spoke to a local television station back in '93, and you have not really been on the record since.
No, the world's changed a lot since then. I tell you, Twitter's changed my life. I got on Twitter in January. Literally the second that Donald Trump took his hand off the Bible. I'm not even kidding. I pushed the button and I activated, the website, which is my plea to the president, dearpresidenttrump.org, and started this adventure on Twitter. And I didn't realize I'm so thankful for the community that I have been exposed to. It's been a long, lonely 25 years, and I feel so blessed to have met such wonderful people.
Yes, the anniversary of Rod's disappearance is coming up in September. We understand.
Yeah. It'll be 25 years on September 16th. He disappeared in 1992 on that day, on his way to see the highest law enforcement official that was available to him, which was the Attorney General of the state of Maine, with evidence, of this activity that this United States senator, and I guess I'm just going to come out and say his name. Like I said it way back in '93 on live television, and Bill Cohen, was involved in this activity, and the reason that became part of Rod's story was Rod had stepped into some corruption with the Indians, and we'll get into that as we go through. But it ultimately, and this had started, probably a year or so prior to his disappearance, and I remember our hometown was like 3 hours north of Bangor, and Rod called and said, the good FBI told me to shine my shoes and put on a good suit because big trees are going to fall. And the family all gathered together around the television, and we sat and watched it till midnight. And then we got the call that it had fallen through. And in the days after that, Rod found out that the reason that it fell through is because there was this United States senator, this very powerful person who used his influence to put the kibosh to the truth of what happened to Rod and why he's innocent and why what he stepped into in his capacity as an accountant. And so at that point, Rod said, well, I guess I'm going to have to, figure this out. And so in that process, he found out that there was this tape. And of course, at the time, I didn't know. I thought it was an isolated incident, but turns out that it was obviously part of a big.
And talking to you, and we've had a chance to talk for a while, and it's really been, and I hope we'll have at least 2 hours this week with you, but just things that you're saying, good FBI and bad FBI. I mean, that takes me right to George Webb. I mean, he's, he classifies them into those two categories, and for this to be going on is just quite eerie. Back in 1992, because there definitely are. There's good CIA, bad CIA, good FBI, bad FBI, and it just it just rings truth to me, when I hear stuff like that that's being said, 25 years ago. So that's incredible.
Yeah, I think that it's the time is now. Why did you wait until January 20th of 2017? Because every president from when Rod disappeared until now was involved. And let me just give you a little story that will just kind of set the frame here. So George Bush was the president. We knew George Bush was a bad guy. Of course, we understand the whole Franklin thing and the call boys in the White House now. And so we knew the United States attorney, the Republican under Bush, was, part of the, the crowd with Robert Mueller that was setting Rod up. And so it was around an election time. Okay. It was 1992. And so we have this, Democrat running against Bush. And so this Democrat won. And so we were all excited as a family. Because why? Because a new United States attorney is going to be appointed that's not appointed by George Bush. So we got another president that's not corrupt. We're going to get justice. And literally started pushing in that direction. And then somebody handed me Terry Reid's book, Compromised. And that's when we found out that the Clintons were actually Bush underlings in MENA, in that whole operation. I mean, and if you can just imagine the surprise. And so then the awakening started, and then we realized again, we haven't had a president since Rod disappeared until Donald Trump that wasn't directly involved.
Yeah, and people really need to realize that, because since Kennedy, every occupant of that office has been an integral part of this system, and working hand in hand with the pedophile networks, with the CIA, with the black ops, with the brownstoning. And I remember that. I remember Clinton getting elected in '92 and thinking, oh, thank God. I was his personal paramedic when he came to Stuart, Florida, to visit some bum that some crooked lawyer that they were having a fundraiser. But at that time, I thought, wow, this is so great. What an honor. And that was just about the time. I really didn't start to wake up till 9/11. But yeah, I can really, connect with just being an ordinary citizen like you guys were, thinking, wow, there's some hope here. But boy, little did we know.
Yeah, right, right. So I guess I'll start at the beginning. We're from northern Maine, way up in the northern part of the state, and very sparsely populated. I mean, we never even had football up there because of the potato picking, and a lot of people don't realize that way back 100 years ago, Maine was the largest producer of potatoes in the whole country. So it was really quite a big business. And my point is that we kind of grew up a little bit different up there, and we were all workers. We all started working in the fields when we were very young. Both of my parents came from potato farmers, and so we were a blue collar. My dad was a blue collar worker, and he had 5 kids, and we didn't go without, but we didn't have much either. Rod and I shared a bed, until my older brother went off to college. Rod and I slept in the same bed. And my mom likes to tell the story when he picked potatoes all day during harvest, and he was only 12 years old. There wasn't the labor laws and stuff back then, and he had a little job at the IGA up the street, and he was scheduled that night. Mom tried to talk him into staying home, but he wouldn't. And but that's who Rod was. He went to college and took 2 years at the local Vocational Technical Institute, and then transferred his 2-year degree down to a 4-year degree at Hotham College. And he worked his way through college. There's no loans, and there was no, his parents never helped him, and he worked full time, and he played sports. He was the MVP of the soccer team and the captain of the soccer team. I remember he bought a suit at the Blue Light Special at the Kmart for his big interview. They came to campus to recruit seniors, and he landed a job for Pete, Marwick and Mitchell, which was a big aid accounting firm. And that's really what propelled Rod into being what he ended up being. Somebody, I think the experience that he gained through that is what allowed him, I think, to prosper the way he did when he moved back to central Maine, because the craft or the gifts, or the things that he knew. Somebody said that there wasn't a deal in Maine in the 80s of any significance that Rod wasn't involved in. And of course, I didn't know that at the time, but looking back and really understanding everything he did, and that's why he was sought after, and he was involved in a lot of big deals and a lot of complicated deals, because that's what he did. But he was a good man. He was involved in everything from the water district to the multiple handicap center, the historical society, on and on, CPA, treasurer of the International Association of Financial Planners, and Economic Development Commission, YMCA, Rotary, all that stuff. So, and he was loved, people loved him, and he's a good man. He was like his grandfather, just simple, good, honest feller. And
just for the listeners, I don't know if, and I'm sure, you understand this, and some of the people that have read about the case, but Maine is like a different country, and the corruption that we see, it's all over the country. I think it's got to be a little worse up there, as far as such an insular society, and
Yeah,
the judicial involvement, and I know from Lori Handrahan. I mean, she's been fighting the courts in Maine for, that basically gave her child back over to a pedophile. So just for so the listeners understand. I mean, you've got a guy coming up, grassroots guy who works for a living, gets his education. He's not part. George Carlin used to say it's a big club and you ain't in it. And thank God we're not in it. But he wasn't, part of this, corruption that really had its claws in that state, long before he ever, you know what I'm saying? It just.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people in this movement really don't understand. They think of Maine as this little rural place up in the corner, but it's the old country, and there's old power and there's old money there, and they're so established there. And you got to realize from Newport North, there's one newspaper, and for generations that's all they've had. And if you look at the how that newspaper was founded, like in the late 1800s, and it was for political reasons and to elect a political, somebody into an office, and the same family has owned it the whole time. And then of course we all, or those of us who are aware, know about who the Washington Post is and who the New York Times is. But the Bangor Daily News is exactly like those, and if studied, it's clear to see, and so very, very, it's literally, it's called a controlled military corridor. When and somebody's cringing right now when I say those words, because because he knows where they came from. Bill Cohen knows where those words came from. They came from his mouth. They didn't come from his mouth to my ears, but he knows that's what he said. Anyway, Maine is very unique, and the meaning of that controlled military corridor is that they literally control the courts, the law enforcement, and the politicians. I mean, the whole thing is wrapped up. I think really what happened to Lori Handrahan really says it all. They gave her child back to a pedophile.
Yep. And that thread that's just through all of this, and you'll be exposing that, and that's what people need to know. It's not just the corruption. It's the corruption allows the pedophilia to exist, which in turn supports the corruption. It's like this really sick circle of depravity that has a stranglehold on our country. I'm reading one of the articles here that the most recent one in that newspaper, and seeing that one of his clients was the Indian nation, I don't, these old power families, I can't think they thought too well of him, representing the Penobscot Indian nation. Was that an impression you got, Tim, around that time, or?
I guess I'll back up just a little bit. He came back to Bangor, and he went to work and became a partner in a firm. He went back to his alma mater and helped at Hotham College, and became like the treasurer and vice president, and actually went to Washington and helped draft legislation. Got a lot of small colleges out of HUD, the vice of the corrupt HUD loans and stuff. And so he eventually went on to start his own firm. And so he was had an accounting firm, but he evolved.
I just got to stop you there for 1 second, because that's very, very significant what you just said, the corrupt HUD loans, because it's been proven now. And Catherine Fitz, who I think was secretary of or an assistant secretary of HUD around that time, or maybe before that time, ended up tracing all this corruption through the Pentagon and the trillions that were missing there, and now it's up to $43 trillion. So Rod was helping people get out from under these HUD loans.
Well, that's a great point. I hardly ever get to talk about this because it's one of those, million points of light things here. But I think that's where Rod really started to piss him off. And of course, in hindsight, we know that now. He went into Hotham. He's trying to make it financially strong. And there was these loans to HUD where they were structured in a way where they were never going to be paid off. So all these colleges were like indentured. And Rod went in there and said, well, no, we don't have to do this. I mean, literally, he privatized the dormitories to raise the money to pay the debt to get out from under it. And I think that in hindsight that at that point, somebody said, okay, this guy is going to be trouble. And,
Yep. And just a little ancillary thing that I have to add. Guess where all the records for those loans were kept?
9/11. Let me guess.
No, those were the other ones. But
those were the other ones.
This was way before 9/11, but you're on the right track.
Huh. I don't know.
Oklahoma
City.
Oh my goodness. So there you go.
Catherine Fitz, and she says it on YouTube. It's like if you're anywhere where government financial records are stored, it's really not a safe place to work.
Wow.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
Tim, just an overview. As Rod coming from picking potatoes to now like in Washington D.C. with all these big shots. Did he talk to you about this? Did he have a sense of like what how big it was and what he was up against, if he was trying, or did he have any fear of?
I don't think at that time he had any idea. I think that he was just a common sense guy applying his skill
and
stuff.
Yeah, giving everybody the benefit of the doubt, probably.
Yeah. I don't think he knew. I don't think he knew at that time. So anyway, so he had his accounting firm, and it was typical at the beginning, but then it evolved, and he just realized that he didn't have to grind away at taxes, and basically, long story short, he had handful of, clients that made above average money and helped them to invest and so now we're at where this all started. So in 1988, late 1988, he was contacted by the governor of the Penobscot Indian Nation. Now, the Penobscots got an $80 million lands claim settlement in 1980. Now, just a little sidebar, Donald Trump knows all about this because he testified before Congress, and he talked about those Indians on the over in Connecticut there that didn't look a lot like Indians to him. And and remember when Hillary Clinton, jabbed him for losing all that money in his Atlantic City casino. Well, I think the truth of that is that money was actually lost because of the very same group of people that were involved with this lands claim and managing the Indians' money up in Maine.
Yep, and you can drive. We live close to the Cherokee Reservation. They have a casino on that reservation. They have for numbers of years. Okay, pulls in a lot of money. You drive through that reservation, and it looks like the third world. So I'm sure it wasn't any different in Maine. And these supposed members of the tribe, like I say, they have 1/5 Indian blood. A lot of corruption going on there. But anyway.
Yeah. So
were you bringing? I'm sorry. Were you bringing up the one in Connecticut, Foxwoods?
Yeah. If the management of that place is the same. And so that was part of their gig, I think they figured out way back, this is all about the fleecing of America, and these people sit around and figure out ways how they can steal everything. Like I said, it wasn't until 10 years later when I was reading some of Sherman Skolnick's stuff when I came across this name, and I'm like, this name sounds so familiar. So I called, a contact up at the Penobscot Indian Nation. I said, do you know this name? And he says, yeah, I know that name. I said that. He said that was the name. That guy was in the meeting the night that Rod basically presented his findings of his audit that they had hired him to do. And that just opened Pandora's box right there. So I'll back up.
What's that name of him?
I don't remember it off the top of my head. Like I said, I got so much stuff in this old brain that.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
We'll forget you.
Thanks, dude. Thanks, Howie. Anyway, so Rod was called. Oh, so they got their $80 million settlement, and the same people that earned the settlement. And I think this whole Indian thing literally originated from this group of people up in the Northeast, that's ended up spreading all over the country. But anyway, and so they got the settlement, and they said, well, and we'll help you manage it too. And so, 8 years had gone by, and the Indian in the Indian Nation, thought there was something funny going on. They're like, something just doesn't add up here. And so why don't we get an independent auditor in, and unbeknownst to this group, and see what he finds, and what Rod never talked about what he found. Rod's investigation took him to the Cayman Islands, and when he came back, from the Cayman Islands, he never spoke. He never told anybody. He never talked to anybody about it. I have they offered him a $50,000 a year accounting, consulting contract that he wouldn't. Here's $50,000 a year free. And
or in common parlance, a bribe.
Exactly, and he wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole, and I think again they were like, okay, this guy is just not going to play ball with us, and that was kind of the beginning of the end there, and he stumbled onto, and that right there is a whole book within itself. They're using the bankruptcy courts to basically fleece America, and this. There was a sheriff up at the Penobscot County Sheriff's Department who was a believer. He's a good man. I loved him, and he's gone, and he died of a heart attack at a very young age. And the conspiratorial guy that I am believes that there was more to it. Because even years, the bottom line is that it's been proven in lawsuits, 5 years after Rod was gone, that what Rod stepped into was significant, but they, still managed to, how that works. But
and with these people, they have it's like three strikes. Now he's got first he starts with
John.
Is that echoing?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
That better? That was weird. I don't know why that did that. Thank you, Skype. Thank you, Microsoft. But
thank you, Deep State.
Yeah. Thank you, NSA. Go fuck yourself. Oh, excuse me. But these people, he starts getting into the HUD, which they don't want him to do. Okay. Now he's representing the Indian Nation, and he finds out that, gee, some of their money is down in the Cayman Islands, and it's being screwed with. So that's strike two. And it sounds, the way these people work, it sounds like they were going to give him strike three. And possibly that's what happened, supplying him with this information that he was going to take. He's got the goods on Cohen and some other guys, and
Well, remember the Cohen thing wasn't up until, literally, a relatively short period of time before he disappeared, and he thought, I want to talk to those good FBI guys that, he said, oh, the good FBI said, put on my, shine my shoes and put on my best suit. Big trees are going to fall. So, people within our government have known details of what he stepped into since the beginning. There's mountains of evidence, mountains of it. It's just the constituted authorities won't do their job.
And what year about, Tim, was that when you guys are waiting to hear this on TV and they've told him?
That was probably, in 92, and it would probably be, literally just months, probably at least a month or two, probably before he disappeared.
Okay. And had the Cohen video surfaced by then or not?
Well, no. See, so here we are. So Rod, Rod discovered this stuff, and he wasn't going to sign. He wasn't going to play along. So they started they started demonizing him, and literally the FBI started making all these accusations, and you're guilty of this, and you're doing that, and I literally have Rod's handwritten response to every accusation that was made against him, and this.
So this is when he got the dirt on what they're doing with the Indian money. Then he starts getting attacked by the FBI.
That's right. When they realized he wasn't going to play along, and then his life started getting real rough. Now remember, he never was indicted until 2 months after he disappeared. And I believe that was my fault, because I was being so effective on local television, kind of making a stir. Like at the beginning, the accusations were only for bank fraud. And then literally, I used the word money laundering on TV, and like a day or two later, all of a sudden he's guilty of money laundering too. And
great imagination the FBI has.
Yeah, right. So anyway, so then he finds out what he probably found this out from the good FBI, that there's this United States senator that is brownstoned, and he's being used to, squash this. And so Rod, basically,
explain to the viewers what brownstoning is.
Well, it's Operation Brownstone. And, when Donald Trump, in that interview with Sean Hannity in 2015, referred to Epstein Island. Okay. And so on Epstein Island, we know that they had rooms set up and wired for sound and all that. We also learned about that way back in the late 80s with the whole, boys in that whole era with the call boys in the White House with the Spence and the brownstones in Washington, D.C. that were wired for sound. And so I think Operation Brownstone was, in my mind, the forerunner of the operation that was being run, by Epstein. And so Operation Brownstone is where, the deep state basically compromises people to put them in power so they can be controlled.
Yeah. And not only occurred in D.C., as we know, with Henry Vinson, and he wrote a great book, Confessions of a D.C. Madam, and he was the gay madam, for for D.C. and all these, Craig Spence, who was the guy. Are you guys still there?
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm.
This is making weird noises. They were Craig Spence, who was a CIA operative, and that's what they did. They had these palatial homes, and they got members of Congress in there with underage, basically children, raping them, and then they were compromised. So that's what Brian and in New York before that. And actually, I found this out through Jim, and I've still got to talk to Jim about this whole case because I'm really kind of puzzled there. We're talking about Jim Rothstein, but at any rate, everybody knows Roy Cohn, who was the lawyer for the House Select Committee during the communism, witch hunts in the 50s, was also a notorious serial pedophile. His mentor, and later on, was Roger Stone, who was like hand in glove with the guy and procured children for him. and it's alleged that he procured children for them. What we do know is that Roy Cohn had AIDS, and that many of these children also were infected with HIV during this period of time, which would have been late 70s to early 80s. So yeah, and all major U.S. senators, and why would Cohen be any different?
Yeah, and just a little point too I want to make when you brought up Henry Vincent, and then of course Nick Bryant, the author of Franklin Scandal, who I know and talked to while he was writing that book, and other great stories in regards to the Lawrence case up in Maine. I actually interviewed Sandra. I went to church with Sandra Lawrence, and I didn't even know it. And I was on the phone with Nick Bryant, and he said her name, and we were talking about that case. And then and then like a light bulb went off, and I'm like, and I was on a committee at church where we help people, to get through things and stuff. And like Sandra Lawrence. I said, can't be. And I hung the phone up, and I drove right over to her house, and I interviewed her, and it's true. They would show up at her house in the evening and load her up with whatever she wanted, booze and drugs, and take off, and the kids wouldn't be returned till early in the morning. And anyway, and then
child trafficking, sex trafficking.
Yeah, and Vincent, you brought up Vincent. Nick Bryant told me that he gave the New York Times, the evidence that would vindicate my brother, and that was 25 years ago. And this Vincent
and Henry would know because
they got him from Henry.
Yeah, they did the same thing to him. They set him up to take the fall after it all went bad, and that's obviously what they were doing to Rod. They stuck this weird, intimidating guy that wanted them to use credit cards, and so Henry was like, okay, we'll do this, and he sets up a credit card business in Miami, and it turns out he just happened to be a Secret Service agent. So what that accomplished was getting the Secret Service jurisdiction in that case. So and Vincent went to prison, I think, for almost 10 years on charges that were basically entrapment. So that case actually reminded me of what happened to Rod and these BS indictments that they cooked up, after he was already murdered.
Yeah, and his testimony alone is, in my view, enough to vindicate my brother and put Cohen right in jail. So now that brings us to the tape. So here's Rod. He's trying all he can do to get these people off his back and to try to find somebody in law enforcement that will listen to him. And then you got this tape thrown in, and so he obviously finds out where this tape is. And of course, at the time, I thought it was an isolated incident, but obviously now I think that this tape was in the hands of a friend of Cohen. And here will you hold on to my copy and put this in your safe at your business. And so Rod, and of course, Rod's family, he had moved him to Vermont. Rod had caught, his house, we had his house debugged, and we found bugs in his house. He caught two guys going by aliases, following him. And so he moved his family to Vermont. He was staying at his little hotel that he owned in VZ right outside.
What year is this, Tim?
This would be in 92. And early.
We're right up to 92. Okay.
He is already the victim of a concentrated federal life disruption program. And they have manuals on this. And
thank you.
That's what they're doing to Rod and his family, and making life as miserable as, and some people kill themselves.
I think that's what they were shooting for.
Yep.
I think that's what they wanted. They wanted him because, believe me, it was that unreal, and you don't even know how good it feels to hear somebody else say that. I mean, I haven't heard anybody ever say that for 25 years, you know? Anyway, and it's true, you know? They were demonizing him and they were trying to destroy him. So
And this is stemming all from what he discovered through the Indian tribe?
yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah. He stepped into
and believe me, they had a hard on for him since the HUD. That's right.
yeah, I in hindsight I believe that too.
Yeah.
So we come from a tough stock and he wasn't going to quit. And so he was staying at the Stucco Lodge in Vesey, and he bought from the manager. He had a 9mm. And he was never a gun guy. Literally, the last time I saw Rod, we shared a hotel room, and he never took his clothes off all night. And he had his shotgun was pumped, and he laid right on his side the whole night, you know. So, but evidently he was under the impression that a 9mm wasn't big enough, so he bought from the manager of the hotel his .357 Magnum, and he was going to go, and he was going to go, come hook or crook, and he was going to get that tape, and he was going to, and Michael Carpenter, the Attorney General of the state of Maine, the highest law enforcement officer available to him, who was telling Rod that he was talking to the United States Attorney General and other investigative committees in Washington about this very case, knew he was coming, and he was going to deliver that tape, and he was going to deliver the other evidence. Okay, and so Rod left. He left the Stucco Lodge on his way to pick the tape up and drive to Augusta, which is probably just over a couple hours south of Bangor. And he
never had the tape in his possession.
Who knows? He's never been seen since.
No, but I mean before that, he had obviously, and it seems from what I read, he had a lot of corruption evidence in his possession. And so now somebody is offering him a tape that implicates Cohen. Do we know who that was?
No, I don't think anybody was offering it to him. He was going there to take it by force. He knew where it was.
Okay.
He was going to march into this real estate office on State Street in Bangor, Maine.
I see. Okay.
And he was going to take that tape by force, if necessary, to clear his name and to get this off his back.
Wow.
And he hasn't been seen since.
Yeah. And I didn't realize that. I thought somebody had either said they have it and come get it, or he had it before, but apparently he was at the point which anybody would get to under any of those disruption programs, that if you know where evidence exists that's going to stop what's happening to you from happening, you would take it by force. Wow. And do we even know how he knew that tape was there, or
no, sir. I really don't. Like I said, I think I remember, because I would go down to visit him, because during the week he'd be in Bangor trying to, keep his businesses afloat and running, and he was alone all week. So I would drive down and spend time with him during the week so he wouldn't be alone. And I can remember laying there in his hotel room, reading those, FBI reports about the finders and about, that awful snuff sex and that
satanic ritual abuse.
I mean, just terrible things they do to those kids. But so we knew, and he knew, but I think he clearly understood, more than I, because and I think he was just, protecting his little brother, really.
Yeah. And trying to protect the whole family, I'm sure. 3 children, his wife, my goodness.
Right. So anyway, yeah. So that's the last anybody ever seen of Rod. He's never been seen since, and that's where he was going. He was going to deliver a tape, and it's not like it was like we learned early that we were being taken advantage of. And so, we basically I took that little recorder that I told you about and I gave it to my sister, and I put it in her purse and I clipped it on her thing, and they had a meeting scheduled with Dennis, and I didn't attend. And my sister sat there at a local restaurant, and they had a conversation. And in that conversation, this state of Maine police detective refers to this tape. And I also know that when I was on television that night, when I said it right out on live TV, that Rod Hotham was delivering a tape. I didn't know it was called a brownstone tape at the time, and I thought it was an isolated incident, but of this United States senator that was in a compromising, situations with children. And, a
local detective is on tape, referring to that tape to your sister.
Yeah, I have that tape, and I know that when I was on TV, an acquaintance was standing in the Attorney General's office, and the Attorney General's watching the tape of the night before of me on TV saying it, and they had a conversation, and the Attorney General, basically, I know I've never seen that tape, but I know of that tape, and
do we know that police officer's name? What was his name?
Yeah, that's Dennis McClellan. Yeah, he's yeah, he was the state police officer. Listen, he claimed his brother was CIA. One week he came to Rod, and when Rod's family had moved already, and he said, "You need to get out of town this weekend. There's a hit coming." So obviously this guy's brother tipped him off that there was a hit coming. Well, that weekend a banker was killed from the coast of Maine, and if you just follow that one story itself, will unfold. It'll probably connect to Libya and Gaddafi and stuff being filtered in through that bank that this guy was trying to whistleblow on. And I was really quite close to a local TV reporter at the time that was trying to, win a Pulitzer Prize. And that whole story changed. That they set up a patsy and put some guy in jail, supposedly because I killed him because he caught me stealing some cassette tapes or something. Yeah, but
it sounds just like what's going on in Washington right now with the A1 brothers, and George Webb is exposed. The car dealers that are being murdered, and it's like they murdered a guy close to Rod just to send a message, and probably somebody they were going to kill anyway. But they tell him there's a hit out on you, and then all of a sudden another guy that's kind of they're after too, really. For another reason is murdered close to him. That's just another message to him to back off.
Tim, can we break down this tape, because we've given out a lot of names, and I just want to if we're talking about a Senator William Cohen, where did this tape originate from?
I have no idea.
No idea. But how did your brother come across this? Can you just?
I really don't know that either, sir.
You don't? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't. All I know is that we found out that there was this influential person that was using his influence to undermine the truth of what Rod had stepped into from coming out, and how exactly Rod connected those dots. I really don't know. I wasn't with him.
What we do know, and you have factual proof of in that tape your sister made, is that a state police detective was aware of the tape and what was in it. Correct?
Oh, listen, I came from northern Maine, and I knew nothing about nothing. And within a month's time, my head was spinning. I had people coming out of the woodwork. There are things going on in that little town. Even the sheriff that has now passed, shared with me a lot of things, and so, a lot of people in that community up there know full well
Right. But I mean, at least we can establish that detective knew about the tape and knew what was in it. And I'm thinking if a detective in the state police knew about it, that the attorney general probably knew about it and what was in it too. I would imagine.
Well, we can establish that also, and so we can establish those two things clearly. That those two people knew that tape existed, and
now when Rod went missing, how was it treated? Was it treated as a missing persons, or
that's such a great question, because
and who was in charge of? Yeah,
nobody. See, that's just the thing. They treated him as somebody who stole a lot of money and was running from all the bad things that he did, and then the little Washington Post, Bangor Daily News started painting the picture. And they tried him, in the paper, and they tarred and feathered him in the paper, and they had everybody up there convinced. And even, like I said, we know, I know who killed my brother. On the 10-year anniversary of Rod's disappearance, there was a newspaper article that came out. 10-year anniversary of accountants. Missing accountant, and the phone rang, and the guy said to my mother, "I know who killed your son." And,
oh, wow.
And so I happened to be living in Bangor at the time, and I went, and me and him stayed up all night talking. Long story short, this guy was the state's key witness in a murder, and the people that he was testifying against, he was told, you don't want to mess with those guys. They kill people for a living. They're the ones who killed that accountant from Bangor. And of course, at the time, it meant nothing to him because he didn't know who the accountant from Bangor was. He didn't read the paper or what have you. But that morning, he saw that story, put two and two together, thought the right thing to do was to help, and called my mom. Well, and of course at the time, I had a state police detective pleading the fifth on the stand. The missing persons report that was okay. So much to it. Let me.
Yeah, focus. Take a rest. You've covered an awful lot.
Let me just finish how I know Rod's dead. So didn't trust the state police. Took me years looking for, all I had was a list of names and what they did. They took him in the woods, they killed him, and they stuffed his body under a tree with a skidder. And all I had with a list of names, and that's all I had. And like 2.5 years later, I'm at Kingsbury Plantation, an unorganized territory in western Maine, looking through land records in a little private real estate office. And the woman said, she was getting annoyed with me. I think she wanted to go to lunch or whatever. And I just told her, I said, you remember that accountant that disappeared 10 years ago? Yeah. Well, that's my brother. And then I just told her, I'm just trying to figure out what happened to him. She said, well, you want to talk to Conan Ferber. He's the only year-round resident in Kingsbury Plantation. And if anybody would know, he would. I went to Conan Ferber, and he had big old beautiful log home up there, no power or anything. And I said, listen, I'm looking for my brother. This is all I have. I have a list of names. And he looked at that list. He walked out in his garage. He took a cardboard box off the top of a file cabinet, thumbed through it, picked out a little receipt, looked at me and said, yeah, those guys were working for me on September 16th, 1992. He had inherited all this land and occasionally cut wood off it to maintain it and to make a little money, what have you. And literally, he took me right out where they were working. And anyway, long story short, I finally was met a guy at church that happened to work for the Attorney General's office, and he encouraged me that he would find an honest cop, and I went to that honest cop, and I provided them the information, the way it was explained to me is that they had a lawyer up in that area that was missing, and it was the same MO, and that it wasn't public knowledge, and that the only way that I would know that if it was true, and that they had to open an investigation into his murder. So at that point, the Maine State Police admitted that they believed that Rod had been murdered. And,
what year was that, Tim?
2000. I want to say 2005. I apologize, but it was.
So 13 years after he's murdered.
I've got pictures with cadaver dogs and forest ranger and state police looking for my brother's body.
And I'm telling you, I know. I was in fire rescue and had some interaction with law enforcement. If they're going to open a case, they're scared of something, and the information that you got apparently got somebody scared enough where they said, oh God, we're going to have to look like we're actually trying to do something. And wow, man, that's just unbelievable.
I mean, I hate to say this, but you haven't heard anything yet. I mean, I could go on for a week without taking a breath, and you'd feel the same way. It's one shocking revelation after another, but the sad reality is that this isn't isolated up there. With all this pedogate stuff coming out, it seems to be everywhere.
Yeah, and we're hoping that's going to be the thread that unravels this just mess. God. Well,
that's a pretty good place to leave it for tonight, because Tim's coming back on Thursday, and there's so much more to talk about.
We're getting close to time.
Yeah.
And
I'm pretty blown away so far. I mean, I already learned more, like you said, for this type of story, even though, Twitter was a great way to get you talking. And I remember in the beginning, because like I said, I remember seeing you and I'm like, wow, okay, whatever. You had a picture of your brother, and I'm like, all right, what is this all about? And, I'd see more tweets, and then, catching stories. I'm like, whoa, this is like a real story here. And, but Twitter's not the best way to, get that all across in, 140 characters. Yeah.
Yeah. It's tough, when you're operating on a shoestring, and literally, I mean, if I had the ability, I probably would have been more effective, but I guess everything happens for a reason. And I think the timing right now is just right. I think that this is just part of, all these wonderful people that are rising up through this movement, and I'm just a cog. That's all I am. Just one cog, It started with justice for Rod, but now it's really justice for Adrian Jones, and really trying to get our republic back.
But real quick, is anyone in Maine? You're still in Maine?
No, sir. I live in South Carolina now.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I mean, a story. It's probably just a memory to a lot of people.
Yeah, no, it's a controlled corridor
right.
out there. People are just starting to wake up, and literally when that beast, Cohen just woke up, it just realized that this was going on. And if you follow what he's been doing, went to Thailand, what did he clean up over there? And now, I mean, just today at 7:30 this evening, the Washington Post article with him quoting and slamming Trump right in the ground.
The music got us. Thank you, Tim.
Thanks, guys.
We'll see you on Thursday. Much more to come. Stay on, Tim. Stay on.
Yep.